In the quiet farming village of Farmersville, Illinois, a horrifying crime on Thanksgiving Eve 2021 turned a promising first date into a devastating tragedy. The victims were Leslie Reeves, a passionate self-defense advocate and mother of two, and Chris Smith, a beloved musician and community figure. Leslie, known for empowering women through her self-defense classes, was a beacon of hope for many, while Chris's charisma and generosity made him a well-loved figure in his small town. The man accused of this heinous act was Bobby Tarr, Leslie's ex-boyfriend. A contractor by trade and father of three, Tarr was known to exhibit troubling and obsessive behavior after their relationship ended. As details unraveled, his name became central in a case that would grip the public with its chilling twists, devastating losses, and unthinkable violence. What led to this tragedy? How did a first date turn into a deadly encounter? And what role did Bobby Tarr play in it all? The answers would reveal a tale of love, obsession, and unthinkable violence that shook this small community to its core. Leslie Reeves was a woman dedicated to making a difference in the lives of others. A divorced mother of two, she had rebuilt her life after a difficult marriage. Her passion lay in self-defense instruction and empowering women, especially those affected by domestic violence. Leslie's mission was clear: to teach women how to protect themselves and regain control over their lives. Alongside her work, she was a close friend to many, offering support and encouragement in every aspect of her personal and professional life. Leslie's drive to help others came from her own experiences, and she used her personal story as a catalyst for helping others escape from abusive relationships. Leslie was known for her unwavering commitment to her family and friends. Her life revolved around her two children, and her social circle was tight-knit. She was a beacon of strength and resilience to those around her. But behind the strength was a woman who had also known hardship and pain, and she wore her scars with pride, determined to turn them into lessons for others. Chris Smith was a man who, like Leslie, had experienced personal challenges. A divorced father, Chris was a fixture in his small town, known not only for his music, but for his generosity and kind heart. He was the lead singer of a local band and spent much of his time working in his community, doing everything from helping neighbors with projects to donating pumpkins for Halloween events. Chris was a community-oriented man, always putting others before himself. Despite his personal struggles, he remained positive and involved, finding joy in the little things and always looking out for others. Chris lived with his loyal dog, Tiki, who had been by his side for years. Tiki was more than just a pet. She was a source of comfort and support, and many believed that it was Tiki who helped keep Chris going in the days following the shooting. Chris was also deeply connected to his family, especially his mother and sister, who were both devastated by the events that unfolded. Bobby Tarr, on the other hand, was the person who seemed to have the most difficult time letting go of the past. A contractor by profession and a father of three, Bobby was described by those who knew him as possessive and controlling. When Leslie ended their relationship, Bobby's behavior took a dark turn. What had once been a relationship marked by love quickly devolved into something much darker: obsession. Despite their breakup, Bobby's actions became increasingly troubling, and friends and family noticed his attempts to stay involved in Leslie's life, often showing up uninvited or trying to control her decisions. His ex-girlfriend's new relationships, particularly her interest in Chris Smith, only fueled his anger. His behavior became more erratic, and his fixation on Leslie grew more dangerous. Those closest to Leslie feared for her safety, with friends even warning her about Bobby's inability to accept the end of their relationship. Yet, as the investigation would later reveal, Bobby's obsession would lead to a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The night before Thanksgiving in 2021 began with excitement and hope for Leslie Reeves. She had agreed to a first date with Chris Smith, a kind-hearted musician she had recently connected with. The two planned a simple evening, meeting at a local bar in the small farming community of Farmersville, Illinois, a quiet place far removed from the chaos that was about to unfold. As the night progressed, Leslie seemed to be enjoying herself. She texted her close friend Nanette Steyer, assuring her that everything's going okay. However, a second text came later, hinting at an unease she couldn't quite articulate. "I feel like something's a little bit off." This would be the last message Nanette received from Leslie. While Leslie and Chris were getting to know each other, Bobby Tarr, Leslie's ex-boyfriend, was reportedly consumed with obsession. Despite their breakup, Bobby seemed unable to let go. That night, his fixation took a dangerous turn. According to investigators, Bobby began tracking Leslie's movements. Reports indicate that Bobby followed her to Farmersville, watching as she entered Chris's home. As the evening unfolded, Bobby's behavior became more erratic. He searched Chris Smith online, looking for details about him. Later, he texted a friend, speculating about Leslie's intentions. In one message, he expressed doubt about her claims of simply going out with friends. "I don't feel like she would drive that far for a party or go out with a girlfriend. I think it's for a dude." Bobby's growing suspicion and jealousy would lead him to take a series of actions that would forever change the lives of Leslie, Chris, and everyone who cared about them. While Leslie and Chris were seemingly enjoying their evening, Bobby's obsessive thoughts were escalating into a violent resolve, one that would culminate in a tragedy no one could have foreseen. On Thanksgiving morning in 2021, the peaceful quiet of Farmersville, Illinois, was shattered by an act of unimaginable violence. What began as an innocent first date for Leslie Reeves and Chris Smith turned into a nightmare at the hands of Leslie's ex-boyfriend, Bobby Tarr. Consumed by jealousy and unable to accept that Leslie was moving on, Bobby took his obsession to a horrifying extreme. At around 1 a.m., Bobby arrived at Chris's house. Evidence suggests that he attempted to force his way in through the back door, smashing the glass pane to gain entry. Inside, Chris and Leslie quickly realized the danger they were in and desperately tried to block Bobby from entering. In the kitchen, the signs of a struggle told a harrowing story. The refrigerator had been pulled away from the wall, possibly to barricade the door, chairs were overturned, and blood splattered across the kitchen, marking the chaos of their fight for survival. Chris, determined to protect Leslie, confronted Bobby directly. It was here that Bobby allegedly fired his gun, the bullet striking Chris in the head. The shot was devastating, leaving Chris unconscious as he collapsed to the floor. Remarkably, despite the severe injury, Chris's life was not immediately extinguished. He lay in a pool of blood, clinging to life, while his attacker turned his attention to Leslie. Terrified, Leslie fled to the living room, likely hoping to hide or escape, but Bobby pursued her with cold precision. In what investigators later described as an execution, Bobby raised his gun and shot Leslie in the head, killing her instantly. The single gunshot left her lifeless on the living room floor, a tragic end to a woman who had devoted her life to teaching others how to defend themselves. The home was now a gruesome crime scene. In the kitchen, Chris lay motionless, gravely injured, and surrounded by blood. Meanwhile, in the living room, Leslie's body rested where she had been mercilessly killed. Blood smeared every surface in the kitchen, from the walls to the cabinets to the floor, a testament to the violence that had unfolded. Amid the carnage, one presence remained steadfast: Tiki, Chris's loyal dog. For the next 12 hours, Tiki stayed by Chris's side, providing warmth and comfort. Many believe this devotion played a crucial role in keeping Chris alive until help finally arrived. When emergency responders reached the scene later that morning, they were met with a sight that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The evidence in the kitchen depicted a desperate and brutal struggle. The living room bore silent witness to a calculated act of violence. Leslie's lifeless body, struck down by a single shot, was a stark contrast to the vibrant, empowering woman she had been in life. Chris, miraculously still alive, was rushed to the hospital. Despite losing a significant amount of blood and sustaining a critical brain injury, he survived. Doctors and investigators alike marveled at his resilience, though his road to recovery would be long and arduous. This violent act did not just claim Leslie's life and leave Chris forever changed. It shattered the peace of an entire community. Farmersville, a quiet farming town, now bore the weight of a crime so senseless and devastating that it defied understanding. Thanksgiving, a day meant for gratitude and togetherness, would forever be remembered in Farmersville as the day of an unspeakable tragedy. Chris was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Despite losing significant blood and suffering severe brain trauma, he defied the odds and survived, though doctors placed him in a medically induced coma. With Chris unable to provide any details, investigators began piecing together the horrific events of the night. Leslie's friend, Nanette Steyer, who had grown worried after not hearing from her, provided crucial context. Nanette revealed that Leslie had recently severed contact with her ex-boyfriend, Bobby Tarr, out of fear for her safety. Investigators soon focused on Bobby, and their discoveries began to expose a web of lies, surveillance evidence, and damning forensic clues. When questioned, Bobby denied any involvement. He claimed he had spent the night at home and had no knowledge of Farmersville or Chris Smith. However, his story quickly unraveled. License plate readers and surveillance footage placed Bobby's car at a gas station near Farmersville shortly after midnight, directly contradicting his alibi. A gas station receipt confirmed the timestamp, and Bobby's own daughter later revealed that he had left their home twice that night and returned late, visibly upset and behaving strangely. The forensic evidence further implicated Bobby. Days after the attack, investigators discovered a Springfield Hellcat 9mm pistol, the murder weapon, buried in Bobby's yard. While Bobby denied ownership of the gun, it was wrapped in a Ziploc bag bearing his fingerprint. Most damning, Leslie's DNA was found on the weapon, suggesting close-range contact when it was fired. Additionally, Bobby's phone revealed that he had searched for Chris Smith online and researched how a VPN could mask his location, actions that occurred shortly before the crime. Investigators painted a grim picture of what had happened. They believed Bobby had meticulously planned the attack, following Leslie to Chris's home and lying in wait. Consumed by jealousy, he broke into the house, leading to a violent struggle. When Leslie and Chris resisted his entry, Bobby shot Chris in the head, leaving him unconscious in the kitchen. He then pursued Leslie to the living room, where he executed her with a single, fatal shot to the head. Despite his denials, the evidence against Bobby mounted. Surveillance footage, digital searches, and the discovery of the weapon tied him to the crime. The inconsistencies in his alibi, his daughter's testimony, and the forensic evidence left little doubt about his involvement. Bobby's obsessive jealousy and refusal to let Leslie move on culminated in an act of calculated cruelty that left Leslie dead, Chris gravely injured, and a small community reeling from the tragedy. As the investigation into the tragic events of Thanksgiving 2021 progressed, all evidence pointed to Bobby Tarr as the perpetrator. Despite this, Bobby adamantly maintained his innocence, crafting a narrative in which he claimed that Leslie had invited him to follow her to Farmersville for safety because her van was unreliable. Investigators, however, quickly found this story riddled with inconsistencies, and Bobby's behavior raised more questions than it answered. One of the biggest challenges for investigators was the lack of direct physical evidence tying Bobby to the crime scene. No fingerprints or DNA belonging to him were found at Chris Smith's house. The murder weapon, a Springfield Hellcat 9mm pistol, was not located immediately. Days later, it was discovered buried on Bobby's property under circumstances investigators deemed highly suspicious. The pistol was wrapped in a Ziploc bag bearing Bobby's fingerprint, but his DNA was absent from the gun itself. Despite his denial of ownership, the gun carried Leslie's DNA on its guide rod, likely from the moment it was fired at close range. Bobby's defense argued that the gun had been planted to frame him, pointing out that investigators had already searched his property once without finding it. The defense used this discovery as an attempt to discredit the prosecution's case. However, prosecutors argued that Bobby had concealed the weapon and may have manipulated others to bring it back to his property after the first search. The presence of Leslie's DNA on the weapon became a cornerstone of the case, tying the murder to her killer. Adding to the case against Bobby were his erratic behaviors and repeated lies. During initial police interviews, Bobby denied ever leaving his home that night and claimed he had no knowledge of Farmersville or Chris Smith. These statements were quickly debunked when license plate readers and surveillance footage showed his car at a gas station near Farmersville shortly after midnight on the night of the crime. A gas station receipt confirmed the timing, placing him in proximity to the crime scene. His own daughter later testified that Bobby had left the house twice that evening, returning home late and visibly upset. She further revealed that he started laundry in the middle of the night, behavior investigators interpreted as an attempt to clean up evidence. While in custody, Bobby's desperation escalated. Authorities accused him of soliciting a fellow inmate to kill both Chris Smith, the sole survivor of the attack, and Detective Roach, the lead investigator. According to the inmate, Bobby offered $10,000 for the murders, allegedly hoping to silence any remaining witnesses and disrupt the investigation. These accusations of solicitation further undermined his claims of innocence. painting a picture of a man willing to go to extreme lengths to avoid accountability. Throughout the investigation, Bobby continued to insist that he was being framed. He pointed to the lack of definitive physical evidence at the scene and claimed the prosecution was misinterpreting his actions. However, his lies during police questioning and his inconsistent statements eroded his credibility. His digital footprint, showing searches for Chris Smith and VPN used to mask his location, further implicated him, as did his erratic behavior on the night of the crime. For the prosecution, the case against Bobby was built on a combination of circumstantial evidence and his own actions. They highlighted his obsessive jealousy, as revealed through his text messages and internet searches. They argued that the murder weapon found on his property and linked to Leslie's death was further proof of his guilt. The solicitation charges demonstrated his continued efforts to obstruct justice and silence witnesses. Each piece of evidence added to a narrative of premeditation and cold-blooded violence. For Leslie Reeves' family and friends, the pursuit of justice was agonizing. They knew Leslie had feared Bobby and had taken steps to distance herself from him, yet his obsession had ultimately cost her her life. Chris Smith, who survived the attack but was left permanently injured, became a symbol of resilience but also a living reminder of the trauma inflicted by Bobby's actions. The road to justice was long and fraught with challenges. The lack of direct physical evidence tying Bobby to the scene left room for doubt, but his lies, his digital trail, and the forensic evidence tied to the weapon painted a damning picture. Ultimately, the prosecution argued that Bobby's jealousy, rage, and inability to let Leslie move on drove him to commit an unthinkable act of violence. Though Bobby continued to protest his innocence, the evidence against him left little question about his culpability in the horrific events of that Thanksgiving morning. The pursuit of justice for Leslie Reeves and Chris Smith culminated in the trial of Bobby Tarr, where a combination of circumstantial evidence and his own actions sealed his fate. Despite the lack of direct DNA or fingerprints tying him to the crime scene, the prosecution built a compelling narrative from Bobby's search history, repeated lies, and the discovery of the murder weapon, a Springfield Hellcat pistol linked to Leslie's death. Throughout the trial, Bobby maintained his innocence, claiming he had no involvement in the shootings and that he was being framed. However, his own contradictions, including lies told during his police interviews, cast doubt on his credibility. His attempts to solicit the murder of Chris Smith and Detective Roach while in custody further damaged his defense, painting him as a man desperate to escape accountability. The jury, presented with the evidence and the prosecution's narrative of Bobby's actions, deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Bobby showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but the courtroom erupted with a sense of relief and vindication for Leslie and Chris. 2 months later, during sentencing, the judge imposed an 85-year prison term on Bobby Tarr. The sentence reflected the gravity of his crimes, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. In court, Bobby continued to deny his involvement, standing by his claims of innocence and alleging that the evidence against him had been fabricated. For Leslie's family and friends, the conviction brought a measure of closure, though the pain of her loss would never fade. They remembered Leslie as a bright, compassionate woman who had devoted her life to helping others, only to have her own life tragically cut short. For Chris Smith, the verdict meant that he could finally begin to heal, knowing the man who had destroyed his life would never harm anyone else again. The case of Bobby Tarr underscored the power of persistence in seeking justice. Despite significant challenges, investigators and prosecutors built a case that revealed the truth behind Bobby's actions. His conviction served not only as justice for Leslie and Chris, but as a reminder of the importance of confronting and addressing the dangers of obsessive, controlling behavior before it escalates into tragedy. The tragic murder of Leslie Reeves and the brutal attack on Chris Smith cast a harsh light on the dangers of domestic violence and stalking, exposing how obsession and control can escalate into catastrophic violence. Leslie, a tireless advocate for women's safety and empowerment, had spent years teaching others how to protect themselves. The cruel irony of her death at the hands of an ex-partner she had worked to distance herself from left her friends and family devastated. Leslie's friends remember her as a compassionate and determined woman who sought to uplift others. Her self-defense classes and advocacy for women in abusive relationships were deeply personal efforts, rooted in her own life experiences. The tragedy of her murder underscores a painful reality. Even those who dedicate their lives to protecting others can become victims themselves. Leslie's death is a stark reminder that domestic violence is not bound by circumstance or character and can strike anyone, no matter how strong or prepared they may seem. For Chris Smith, the only survivor of the attack, his story is seen as nothing short of a miracle. Shot in the head and left for dead, Chris survived for 12 excruciating hours, kept warm and comforted by his loyal dog, Tiki, until help arrived. However, survival has come at an immense cost. Chris faces a lifetime of physical and emotional scars. Partial paralysis and lingering pain serve as daily reminders of the tragedy, while the memory gaps caused by his injury leave him unable to fully understand what happened that night. Despite these challenges, Chris's resilience and determination to rebuild his life have become a source of inspiration for those around him. For Leslie's friends, Chris's family, and the prosecutors, this case serves as a call to action. They emphasize the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships, jealousy, control, and stalking behaviors, and taking them seriously. Leslie's fears about Bobby Tarr were not unfounded, but even with her awareness, the systems designed to protect victims failed to prevent this tragedy. In the wake of the case, friends and advocates have vowed to continue Leslie's mission of empowering women and raising awareness about the dangers of abusive relationships. Prosecutors and law enforcement involved in the case stress the need for vigilance and early intervention, urging people to trust their instincts and seek help when they or their loved ones feel unsafe. The legacy of this case is bittersweet. Leslie's life was stolen in an act of senseless violence, but her memory remains a beacon of hope for others, reminding them to fight for safety and justice. Chris's survival, while miraculous, is a testament to the strength of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. As the community reflects on the events that transpired, one message is clear: domestic violence and stalking are not private issues. They are societal problems that demand collective attention and action. Through awareness, education, and support, the hope is to prevent future tragedies and honor the lives of those who have suffered. This case is a stark reminder of how quickly obsession can spiral into violence and how essential it is to address these behaviors early. It calls on all of us to be vigilant, to recognize the signs of unhealthy relationships, and to take action to protect ourselves and those around us. Let Leslie's life and legacy inspire us to do better. By supporting efforts to combat domestic violence and empowering survivors, we can create a world where no one has to endure what Leslie and Chris experienced. If you or someone you know feels unsafe in a relationship, please reach out to local or national resources for help. Together, we can honor Leslie's memory and ensure her tragic death serves as a catalyst for change.